Now, something called non-GAAP disclosures are a key piece of financial statement analysis, and they're non-GAAP. We don't really talk about them very much in accounting, but they're very important. Companies come up with non-GAAP disclosures. In essence, they come up with some of their own measures to measure their performance. And this is a sword that can really cut two ways, because companies, on the one hand, they may change the numbers around a little bit to better reflect reality. A lot of times there's distortion in GAAP. For example, we talked about R&D. R&D is recorded as an expense. But in reality, investors don't think it's an expense. Why should R&D lower your income if in fact it's an investment in the future? So maybe we should remove R&D. Similar with depreciation and amortization. Depreciation and amortization is the cost of using equipment that you previously purchased. You don't have to pay for depreciation and amortization, and it's inherently backwards looking because it relates to how much you paid for equipment in the past. So maybe depreciation and amortization ought to be excluded from income. GAAP requires that you include it, but maybe when you want to understand a company's performance, you want to exclude it. So what companies will often do is they'll prepare what they call non-GAAP performance measures or pro forma income measures that better measure their financial performance. And the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, says that you can do this. It's Regulation G. The only thing is you need to explain how you calculated it. So you need to show net income and then show you whatever you added and subtracted to arrive at your non-GAAP income or your your pro forma income. And the goal should be to provide better information to investors. Now, the argument is that what companies actually do is they exclude a lot of expenses. And what this does is they also exclude a lot of gains and losses. What this often does is this tends to increase pro forma net income. So what companies will do is they'll exclude all these expenses, and on average, the reality is that pro forma or non-GAAP income is usually higher than, on average, it's higher than GAAP income. It's inherently less conservative. For some reason, companies exclude the bad stuff, but they include the good stuff. And that's why this is something that you should be somewhat suspect about. The thing is, companies have to explain how they calculated it, and they need to calculate it in a consistent way. So you can look at it carefully, and you can see if you want to exclude certain items or add certain items back in and come up with your own custom measure of performance. This was an SEC warning. It's in your textbook. The SEC is very wary about non-GAAP income or pro forma income, mainly because companies tend to exclude the bad stuff, but they keep the good stuff in there. And so when you're reading GAAP financials, there's a whole bunch of things you want to look at. You don't necessarily have to ignore non-GAAP disclosures, but you want to see if they provide a better measure of the company's performance. Most of the time they do, but sometimes there are some tricky things the companies pull that may make the financial statements misleading. There's a few other things when you go through a 10K or an annual report that you want to look at. You want to look at the opinion letter by the auditor. The auditor will issue an opinion letter. 95% of the time it's unqualified. But when there is anything that's qualified or anything that strays from the standard language, you want to be really careful. One common change is that the previous auditor did last year's financial statements and they're relying on that. What you would want to know is, why did they change auditors? Read the notes to the financial statements. Look at their accounting policies and see if they use the same accounting policies as other companies in their industries. Look at if there's a change in accounting policy. Look and see how much that affected their income. Why did they change their accounting policy? Work through the ratios that we've been talking about and compare those ratios to other companies in the industry. In our project, what we're going to do is you'll submit me your ratios and I'll take all the class ratios and combine them together. And then we'll see how your numbers compare to all the other companies in the industry. Look at the non-recurring items and think about if they really impact future performance or not. If they don't impact future performance, then you might want to ignore them. And make changes. We're going to spend a lot of time doing this in class. or video, whatever you want to call it. But you can change financial statements. In essence, what you could do is you could take your financial statements on a spreadsheet and you can add things here and subtract them there and move things around to where you think they belong. So if you think that a company's treatment is not as conservative as it should be, or not representative of their real results, then you can make minor adjustments and come up with an income statement or a balance sheet that better represents what you think happened, better represents the company's performance. So that concludes Module 5, and next we're going to go on to Module 6.